Well, it's always a pleasure to come across the river. Somehow the river expands in distance, but it's nice to visit with you, and thank you to the college for the invitation. And I could talk about many different topics. In particular, on previous occasions I talked about populism. I could be talking about Brexit and all of those problems. But today I thought I'd introduce you to a new project that we're starting, and it's really useful to get ideas and feedback, and to think in particular about trust, and to try to reverse some of the conventional ways in which we understand it, and to talk about trust but verify. And this is a project which I'm doing with two colleagues, Will Jennings and Joey Stoker, and you can find details at trustgov.me. So what's this about? Well, trust is an issue which I've done on a number of different occasions now, and I first started some of the work in 1999 with our book on critical citizens, and then later on in our book on democratic deficit. And what I'm going to be doing is really updating some of that and thinking a lot harder about some of those issues. So first what I'll do is talk about the theoretical framework. What do we mean by trust? And why is it by trust, and why is it important? And here what you can find is there's an enormous number of claims in sociology, the social relationships, in economics, in political science, and in international relations. And then I'll talk about our research design, how we're going to think about this issue, and how we're going to gather some new evidence to try to re-understand what trust is about. I'll bring you some comparisons from the current wave of the World Value Survey, brand new data that we're just collecting from countries around the world on how people do or do not trust their government, and then we'll think about some of the further steps in the research and what we need to be doing. So first, what's the theory? Well, this is a book which is under development, and it will be for Oxford University Press, in praise of scepticism. First, we'll have broad theory, how do we understand trust, and how do we start to compare it in countries around the world, and what is the trend? All the time you're hearing trust is on the decline, and that it's been steadily eroding, whether it's in Western Europe, whether it's in the United States, or whether it's in other countries and other governments. Is that actually the case, or is there trendless fluctuations? And then we'll think about four different causes of trust, what's driving this phenomena, what's the explanation, and then why does it matter? What's happening for social cooperation? So let's start with the conventional understandings. And you'll have heard this and the assumptions many times, I'm sure, in different classes, in different books, with different authors. The first, of course, was a tremendous range of studies that came out in the 1990s, particularly driven by my colleague Bob Putnam, about the role of social capital, which included social trust. And by that we mean trust between people, between neighbours, between friends, within a community. And the argument he made in Italy and in the United States was that there'd been a long-term decline from the interwar generation to the younger generations, so that our connections with each other, the way that we related to each other, and the way that we can solve certain local problems. For example, how do you build a hospital? How do you get funding for a school program? How do you get crime in a neighbourhood worked through? He thought that social trust was at the basis of this, and as a result, a tremendous number of researchers started to look at our societal relationships in sociology and in other subfields like social psychology. A second perspective is also developed, and that's based on work, for example, by Francis Fukuyama. And he thought about markets, and how do you get markets to work effectively, particularly in countries where there might have been a breakdown of the state, and his argument, well, the law couldn't really be implemented. And again, his argument was that trust was the cement that pulled us all together. If you're a company and you want to know whether to invest, if you're a worker and you want to work within a company, how can you actually work together? And market economists have said, we're very much based on, in a sense, your handshake or your word is your bond. Not the law, but how we can trust each other in our relationships. In terms of politics, political science, and democracy in particular, again, many authors have said that political trust in parliaments and Congress, in parties, in leaders, in governments, and in things like the courts and rule of law, and in things like independent watchdogs, and of course in the media. All of these are governance institutions in the broadest sense. And again, it was argued that trust there is critical for the workings of liberal democracy. In an authoritarian state, it's argued you can use force, coercion, you can use clientelism or money and corruption. In a democracy, a lot of what we do relies on trust. And work by Russ Dalton in particular has looked at this for many years, UC Irvine, And he argues, again, when he looks comparatively and in the United States, that trust that was there in the 1960s, when we used to have what was termed a civic culture, has gone and eroded in the long term, particularly with political parties, which hold us together in our political systems, but also in our relationships with our representatives. And he felt that that was a critical issue that we needed to tackle and work out how to restore trust. And again, if you look, for example, today in Congress, at the ways in which there were activities going on that were really outside the rules of the game. Or you look at Brexit in Britain and the way that trust is broken down between the parties when they're thinking about collaborating and coordinating to create a common outcome. You can easily see how trust at elite level and trust amongst individuals and voters, particularly amongst young people, has declined. And lastly, global government. Trust in the United Nations, trust in the ILO, trust in the World Bank, trust in all of those international agencies, and trust between countries. And again, you can argue with populism and the rise of nationalism, which we thought perhaps was a 19th century phenomenon, has actually revived itself. Make America great is not just confined to the United States. Many countries have taken up that label in Hungary, in the Philippines, in Russia, and in Turkey. So the idea here is that we're retreating from our international collaboration, treaties, informal agreement, climate change, trade, relationships in the EU, towards much more of a nationalist sense of defensiveness, isolationism, and indeed the actions just being taken by the United States in Syria, I think are a classic case of isolationism, withdrawing from international commitments to protect certain allies and friends around the world. So trust, it's argued in the first set of literatures, is enormously important for everything we want to do. Secondly, it's argued that it's on the decline, that it's been eroding in all of these different features. Different disciplines have come to the same arguments. Now, to some extent, that happens in waves. And so if we go back to the 1970s, immediately after the riots, immediately after the student demonstrations, there was a wave of concern about democracy. That somewhat subsided in the 1980s, but it came back again, I think, in the 1990s, under the Clinton administration, but under the work of Bob Putnam and others. And of course, it's heightened again the anxiety and populism today, where again it's thought that we're fueled by a mistrust of the establishment and elites and of each other. And to use the quotation from Russ Dalton, the argument in the conventional view is that citizens have grown distrustful, and they've grown distrustful of politicians and our leaders, sceptical about democratic institutions and therefore pushing back on democratic ideals and values, and also how the actual democracy process functions. And populism, above all, can be seen as mistrust both of other people, us them, and of elites, those who are in power. Now, if that's true, how do we start to explain this phenomenon? And I think that there's 4 different ways that one can start to think about this. And they come from different disciplines. Part of the trouble with research is that people are often working in one, they don't necessarily make the links to the other discipline at all. So the first argument, why do you trust? Well, it's kind of innate, it's inherent, it's how you're born. And this is the social psychological perspective. And it says, so you're born, for example, in Sweden, and your parents are trusting and your grandparents are fairly honest and they're trusting, and you kind of inherit that view of the world. So you don't question, you're not worried about strangers, you're not worried about crime, you're not worried about your democratic system. And so Eric Olson, for example, says it's really a kind of personality trait. Just like you might be born to be ambitious or resistant, you might be born to be optimistic, or you might be born to be pessimistic, so you might be born as trusting or not trusting. It's kind of fixed. Now, if that's true, of course, it won't change, it should be stable, and we should find a link between parents and children, and how people grow up should be fairly predicted. Second view, however, is slightly different. It's not inherent, and it's not innate, it's not inborn, it's about your early experiences. And again, if you grow up in a city with a high level of crime and drugs and lawlessness, if you grow up in a city where it's dangerous, where there are risks, if you're growing up in a number of the urban areas, for example, in Brazil or in Mexico, or in any of the areas of Central and Eastern Europe which are highly dangerous, then you learn certain cultural values that are very different to growing up in Norway or Sweden with a universal welfare state, with high levels of affluence, and with a broad sense that life is fairly secure. So your early socialization period When you're growing up, things you learn, you might get certain values of trust which then stay with you. And that's the view in particular of my colleague Ron Inglehart. The third view is that more modern views of decision sciences and economics is that trust is something which is much more to do with cognitive psychology, what we understand, what information we have, and in particular, heuristic shortcuts. So I might not have a lot of information in all sorts of choices, but I can use information efficiently to know who to trust through things like motivated reasoning. The last view is the one that I want to argue today, and it's that trust, in fact, can be seen as a rational judgment. It's not innate, it's not inborn, it's not something you carry around with you for the rest of your life. It's something where you're using information to really try to work out whether or not the person, institution, the group is trustworthy. In other words, Margaret Levy and Russ Hardy both came up with these ideas in particular about 10 years ago. Trust should reflect trustworthiness, not be automatic, not be something that's an knee-jerk reaction or an emotional view. So here's my definition. A trusts B to do X. I trust, for example, a lawyer if I need to be defended, to provide a good defence to get me off the hook on that particular issue. I might trust a surgeon who I'm entrusting the whole of my life if it's a life-threatening risk, for example, in heart surgery. I might trust the policeman to protect me. I might trust a teacher with the information. I might trust a party to represent my interests. I might trust a country because I know we have a long-standing alliance. So it's contingent, it's not automatic. And what I'm doing is I'm saying whether or not the other actor is going to act in my interests. So here's the complete definition that we're using, and it's worth thinking about. Trust is a delegated relationship. I've got to ask somebody else to do something. I've got to take a risk in an uncertain environment where I'm really not sure about the outcome, and I need to know that the agent will act on their behalf to achieve my goals, and therefore will protect them, will work with me to get what I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to be healthy, can I trust the surgeon? If I'm trying to buy a car, can I trust the used car dealer? If I'm trying to vote, can I trust the politician's promises? If I'm trying to work in an alliance to protect climate change, can I trust the other country to fulfill their promises? So I've got an imperfect environment, I've got divergent interests, the lawyer, the doctor, the politician might each have very different views. Politicians are trying to change and maximise their vote. Lawyers are trying to build their practice. A company is trying to make money. But the question is, can our interests align? Can I rely upon them to serve my interest versus their interest? Not just to pocket the money, not just to be corrupt, not just to be self-serving, but to really act on my behalf. And I've got imperfect information, even though I might use all sorts of communication channels, even though I might try to gather research before I make that decision, even though I try to do my homework, and I've got vulnerability to risk. The higher the risk, the more the information I'm going to need. So it's a rational idea, a rational choice, and it can act in three different levels. It can be a trust of other groups, and so when you're thinking about us then, which groups do you really feel could protect my interests? Which groups do I belong to? Which groups am I going to have who are going to defend my interests? It can be trusted agencies. Do I trust the New York Times? Do I trust CNN? Do I trust Fox Television? Each of those involves a very different type of judgment that I'm making. And then it's also of global agencies and also other countries. So multi-level, and trust is involved in all of these things. Now, if that's something you can accept as an argument, what does it mean? What rules, what information? What's the actual process by which I come to trust someone? When do you trust your friends? When do you trust your neighbours? When do you trust your colleagues? So I think there's two reasons, kind of rules you can use, as shortcuts to try and trust an institution or an agency that you don't know, or a group you don't know, or a country you don't know. First is reputation. So what you're looking at is how they've done things in the past. If you've got a politician standing for office, say you've got each of the different candidates standing for Democratic primaries, the first thing you'll say is, what have they done in the past? What have they performed? What's their promises? What's their actions? Have they actually fulfilled their word, or are they just making wordy promises which nobody can trust at all? And here what you're doing is you're working out, are they Do they have integrity or are they corrupt? Are they honest and truthful or are they telling us lies? Are they impartial, acting in the public interest or self-serving? And are they competent? Can they actually do what they want to do? When I think again of particular examples going on right now with Brexit, you may have followed some of the shenanigans in Parliament right now with Boris Johnson, and you say, why are people not really buying his decisions? Why is Parliament trying to constrain him? Because they don't believe necessarily that he's had a true history of the past in telling the truth. He seems to slip between different ideas and tell whatever the audience wants. His ideas of impartiality, well, maybe he's just left Boris Johnson, and is he actually going to be able to deliver Brexit? Probably not. So competence is in question. So if all of those things are under question, you wouldn't trust a particular actor. But the second thing is, okay, I don't trust Boris Johnson, do I trust the rules of the game? So it might be that in that position, just like when you're trusting an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, there are certain ways that that professional and that agent is constrained. For example, if the doctor that you've trusted with your healthcare doesn't produce it, then you can say, okay, the medical board can strike them off. There's a protection there and insurance fee. If a politician doesn't meet their promises, then the election can kick them out. If a country doesn't honour its treaties, then other countries will not continue to make alliances with it, and therefore there'll be kind of natural penalties. So, what's the reputation and what's the guardrail? Are there risks which I'm protected against for those reasons? Now, if you follow this along, let's come to the key typology, which is where we're starting to revise some of the conventional wisdom. And this is what you might want to think about. On the one hand, you have how far somebody who's making a trust judgment is either positive or negative. And then you also have what the actual performance of agents, whoever they are, whether they're a party, a politician, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or a teacher, or whoever. And they can be negative or positive. So let's fill this out a bit, and then we can start to think, what is our ideals? What's our normative ideal? So, if you're rational, if you're informed, if you're making the correct judgment, and you are yourself positive, you might say, I trust, for example, Elizabeth Warren. I think she's going to deliver on her promises. I think she's done things in the past, she's got a reputation, and I'm going to believe that she would be the one who might represent my interests. And so, if her performance so far you think to be positive, and you trust her, then you have sceptical trust. That's correct judgment that's going to be reflected in her actions. But equally, in many countries of the world, and in many societies, and in many places, you shouldn't trust. We always teach children, don't trust strangers. Why? Because there's a risk, a very real risk that it's going to harm you. Similarly, if the government, if the politicians are corrupt, if they are repressive, if they're not going to reflect human rights, if they're not going to act in general interest, then of course you shouldn't trust them. And again, just think about that for a minute. We're always assuming when we say trust has gone down that this is a bad thing, not necessarily if the agents of trust have become less trustworthy. But in the other case, that's also something which is positive, in the sense that it's also rational. But what about the other cases? So what you have is the other two cases, which are equally problematic and which we pay very little attention to. So if you think that the agent isn't trustworthy, but then you're positive, you are trusting, then that's a problem. If Congress, for example, really is serving the public good, or the New York Times is reporting the facts, or the lawyers are actually very effective and competent in what they're doing, and you don't trust them, you're cynical, then that's a problem. But similarly, over here, if you do trust your government, or your politicians, or your leaders, and you'll find that in fact they are not trustworthy, then that's compliance. That's going along with somebody who's going to harm you. That is essentially trusting strangers who aren't trustworthy. Charlatans, people who are giving promises which they're not going to fulfill. They're going to basically go against your interests. Now, obviously one could think about this in terms of a variety of different countries. And you might think that you get different types of societies. So, for example, positive experiences in both cases, you can think of countries like Scandinavia, where the government kind of works by nearly every indicator. People are very trusting. And you can also think of cases where government is more or less effective, and yet there's a high level of mistrust. And you can also think of these other cases, and I'll illustrate that with a bit of evidence to show you where the countries fall. And that really helps to kind of understand what this is all about. Now, why does this matter? Here's a simple example, which will show you that we're not simply talking about countries where information is limited, or where there's censorship, or where there's propaganda. Let me just illustrate this by a little something about Trump. First, what we can do is we can look at the Washington Post and many other fact checkers, and one could look at the number of Trump's false or misleading claims over time, from the time he got into power to the most recent period in the administration. And what does the Washington Post and other agencies like that report? That the number of false or misleading claims, otherwise known as lies, has gone up dramatically over time. In fact, it's been exponential, it's been increasing faster in the most recent period. So you might have thought, if people are rational and they're open-minded and they know this, that in fact trust in Trump should go down, right? If they're rational, well, let me show you what happens. This is the percentage of Republicans who report in common polls from YouGov that they think that Trump is honest and truthful, and what we find is more or less flat. So people are expressing trust in the president, despite the fact that the Washington Post and many other news agencies are saying he's not actually trustworthy. So there's a contradiction going on, and you can explain that by a number of different things. You can say, for example, if I'm Republican, that's a motivated reasoning. I have my party, and I'm going to trust those who are part of the party, as part of the tribe, as part of the group. So it's a shortcut. Or it might be other things. You might know that he's not really honest, but not really care that much, and so your opinion is kind of baked in. It hasn't changed over time, despite the Washington Post. Or you can say, this is false. I don't trust the Washington Post. I don't trust the New York Times. I don't trust the established media. That's fake news. And so this isn't true. That shouldn't be true. So there are many ways to think about what's going on, but it's clearly a problem if there are leaders who don't have honest and claims, but the public continues to support them. So how do we test this a bit more broadly? How does this work if we go cross-national, across a variety of different regimes, states, countries, and cultures? What we've got to be able to do to identify skeptical trust is first work out in public opinion surveys, who do you trust? And we have that all the time in all of our surveys, whether they're by Gallup or by Pew or the World Values. We ask about trust in media, we ask about trust in television, trust in the press, trust in parliament, and so on. We need to know an independent measure of how far that agent is performing. Is the media trustworthy? Is government trustworthy? And so on. And then it's the relationship between the two, which is critical. Skeptical trust reflects the correlation between those two factors. So here's how we can start to measure it. Firstly, we can measure public trust using the World Values Survey. This is the granddaddy of these comparative surveys. It started in the 1980s, and it's run through every 5 years or so today. I'm part of that group, along with Ron Inglehart. And what I'm using is the most recent way. Currently in the field, we're still out there with many countries, but we have essentially 58 societies so far. The other countries will all come in by July next year. And we have waves of studies. We ask them basically, how much institutional confidence do you have in government, politicians, parties, civil service, courts, and police? And those are all combined into a national government trust scale. And then procedural performance. How do I know whether the agencies are working well in different places? So here what I need to do is not just cherry pick. I can't just pick, for example, a single measure of corruption or a single measure of delivery. I need a gradual and overview about how our government is working. And what I pick is the worldwide government indicators, which are developed by the World Bank, and those measure different dimensions of government, things like corruption, regulatory quality, government effectiveness, political stability, voicing accountability, and that's another scale. So what's the relationship between the two? Well, I won't, by the way, these are all the measures, I won't go into them in depth, but these are all the measures that we've got for a wide variety of different dimensions of trust and confidence. So you see we have measures of, for example, private sector, measures of confidence in public sector, measures of trust in individuals. But let's just look at the results. What does it look like? And then we can think about the pros and cons of what we're doing and what else we need to do to understand this issue. Firstly, what I've got here is confidence in parliaments, in the Congress, in national assemblies, and confidence in the government. And immediately you can see some of the comparisons which come out from the World Value Survey, and they're really very varied. The two things tend to go hand in hand. So there's a strong correlation. You trust one, you tend to trust the other. But let's look at some of the comparisons, and immediately you'll start to understand why skeptical trust rather than trust is really what's important when we're thinking about this. What's at the top? China. And it's not accidental. When we use a lot of these indicators, China comes out as one of the most positive. But also Bangladesh, Azerbaijan, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and then come some of the more affluent post-industrial democracies. So we've got countries there which have fairly repressive regimes. They could be one-party states, or they could be states with a single leader, a strongman leader, or they could be states which are repressive in human rights. And they seem to be more confident than in Norway, in Denmark, in Austria, in Finland, in those countries which have had a strong tradition of democracy, strong tradition of gender equality, strong tradition of effective democratic governance. And at the bottom here, what we have is a wide range of other countries, but particularly Latin America is well represented, but also some Mediterranean countries, some Middle Eastern countries, Croatia, Peru, Albania, and so on. So, trust per se, this is about the relative position. And here what we can do is we can also compare similar indicators. And so we have trust in parties, which goes along the bottom, and then trust and confidence in the civil service. And there's a bigger scatter, but nevertheless, what's at the top? China again. And next to it, Kazakhstan again. And next to it, we have countries like Indonesia, along with Norway and Sweden. And then down at the bottom again, we have Peru and Mexico, Ecuador, Bolivia, along with Tunisia, Albania, and so on. So the acid test is not the correlation, but how these fall into these four different categories. And this is where, in a sense, the bottom line is. So what we've got is not just attitudes compared with attitudes, but we have confidence in all of those government institutions as your scale. And at the bottom here, the good government scale from the World Bank, which is an indicator of how far government is actually working. And what you find is that the countries fall into these four different categories that we started with in the theory. So the skeptical trusters, that's to say the ones who are making a judgment about whether or not to trust politicians, and the government itself seems to work, that is the Scandinavian countries that we might have expected, the small welfare states that provide generous public services, the ones which have very low levels of corruption, high levels of integrity, high levels of participation, high levels of gender equality. All the other indicators that you might think of in terms of patterns of good governance are very much concentrated there. The United States is quite interesting because it's kind of on the borderline. It's in between those which are skeptical trust and moving towards the more cynical. And then we also have down here some countries where there's a high level of cynicism in the public that is actually merited by the quality of government, according to our indicators. We also look over here. This starts to explain the pattern really in important ways. What we've got here is what we term the compliant trust pattern. That's to say, the public has far more faith in their government than the government indicators, the independent evidence would seem to suggest. And it's not just China, although obviously that stands out. Azerbaijan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Thailand, which is ruled by still a military junta, with a decline of democracy in that country by levels, which has got Lukashenko, Russia with Putin, Jordan, Pakistan. And then down here, we've got countries where the public is mistrusting, and we can see that there's also low levels of quality of governance because there's often high levels of, for example, crime, which is destabilizing societies, or there's high levels of corruption, which is pocketing money from the government, or there's other problems which are going on. Think about Lebanon right now with the mass demonstrations protesting against the government in the environment, or Iraq and the problems of governments which are there, or Argentina, or Bolivia, or Mexico, or Peru. So our argument is that we need to rethink our notions of trust. You would have thought that we would have said, more trust is better. If trust is good, more people should be trusted. Instead of which, what we're saying is, that isn't the normative ideal that we want. If you're trusting things which are untrustworthy, if you don't have the right information, if you don't have the right accurate judgment, if you don't have the knowledge, then essentially the government can, or the actor can basically go against your interests. They won't necessarily represent your views. They won't enact the things which are good for the public as a whole. So, why do you get compliant trust? In other words, why do people trust the government in China and these other countries against the evidence? And why are people more cynical of governments in places like Poland and Chile than they should actually be according to the performance? Before I just give you the explanations, let's also say that we can also look at this in terms not just of good governance, but also of democracy. Democracy is slightly different. It's more about participation, voting, and accountability. And here we have a liberal democracy index from the Varieties of Democracy project, and we also have how far people have trust in each of these agencies. And it's not a linear pattern in any sense or whatever. Instead, we have countries here, again, which have very low levels of liberal democracy. Kazakhstan, Belarus, China, Russia, all as you would expect, and with high levels of public trust. And again, we can see it goes down, and then it goes back up for the countries which have got effective democracy and so on. So it's a puzzle that we need to really understand and go over. So, what's the explanations? And how do we think this together, and what are the problems of these arguments? Firstly, why might people make the judgments which are irrational? Well, it's about individual capacities. Do I actually know what's going on in Congress, in congressional committees? It's a very technical judgment. Do I know how our agents are performing? So the more that I have education, the more that I have knowledge, and the more that I'm interested, and of course, the more media exposure, then you would expect that should lead you to a more accurate judgment. So you're paying attention to what's happening in the news, and you're reading about the impeachment inquiry, and you've heard some of the details about what different people are saying, and you're coming to a judgment, therefore, about trustworthiness, which is much more related to the actual performance. But as well as individuals, we've got to think about societies. And one of the things about any of those societies which are more repressive is, of course, there's freedom of information, freedom of the press, and freedom of expression. So it could well be that because of censorship, people feel that their government is being effective because that's the message they're being given. They feel that their politicians are trustworthy, they don't hear about the problems, and therefore they are more trusting than they actually should be. So if you divide it up like that, what we have to think about is, what's the conditions in society of media pluralism? Which is a complex notion. It's all about how many diverse forms of information do you actually get, or do you just have one? What's the freedom of the press so that you can hear different views, so that independent journalists can stand up against government, investigative journalists, for example, to really rigorously analyse what's going on, and at the level of discussion in civil society is their freedom of expression. So, in order to understand each of these aspects more fully, we need to have a variety of ways of thinking about evidence. And this in particular is thinking about different methods that might get us the sort of evidence to test these arguments. All of this is part of the broader Trust project. So the first thing is, why is there this pattern? Well, it could be that good governance isn't how people are judging the quality of their government. It might obviously be on things like economic development, economic growth, the performance on climate, the development in terms of jobs and unemployment, or the way in which the government is delivering on a variety of other things like safety and security. So we need to look not just at the measures we've got, but at many different types of measures of how a government performs, or how an agent performs, or how society performs, in order to work out how people are making those judgments, and whether it's rational. And therefore we need to look at this in lots of different social contexts. So amongst other things, we're starting about a dozen different surveys in the most repressive regimes around the world, in every single region, to really try to understand what's happening in each of these, whether it's in Venezuela under Maduro, whether it's in Rwanda, whether it's in parts of Central Asia, or whether it's in parts of Africa. And we're picking cases which are going to be able to test some of those arguments. So we need to expand our comparisons to diverse autocracies. And then we need to do this rather technical thing. So we're asking people, do you trust your politicians and your parties, right? So one of the first answers could be, well, people are just not giving honest responses. If you ask them in Belarus or Russia or China or Vietnam, it might be that they don't feel that they can express an honest opinion. So they say, yes, I trust our politicians. In fact, they don't. But they don't know if you're from the government, if you're an official, or if you're an independent servant. So we've got to use some quite clever tests to try to work out if there's response bias. And you get response bias on lots of questions which are politically sensitive. If we were to ask people, for example, about domestic violence, we were to ask people about experience of any form of sexual discrimination, in all of those cases there can be a conditioned response bias, so we need to test for that through our experimental methods. And then we also need to use some focus groups to really unpack how people are making these decisions. And if I was to ask all of you, do you trust President Trump? Do you trust Bernie Sanders? Do you trust Elizabeth Warren? Do you trust Mitch McGuire? How do you make those judgments? What information do you have? How informed are they? And how far are they kind of either partisan-based or just other sort of shortcuts that you use in order to make those decisions? So focus groups are qualitative, and they try to unpack what's going on. And then, as well as these methods, what we also need to do is really think harder about the consequences. Because the normative argument we're making is that trust is not necessarily good. And I know that that is so counter or whatever. Everything that we're always assuming in all of our work, we always assume, again, trust is good, we should be trusting, trust is going down. Maybe not. And trusting of the untrustworthy is dangerous, especially in risky environments, especially in difficult circumstances. So, for example, if you're living in a city with a lot of crime and violence, and the police are corrupt, and you can't trust your neighbours, you shouldn't trust. So what are the consequences of trust and mistrust, and cynical trust and verified trust for social relationships? What are the consequences for democracy? And in our claims, we're going right back to the civic culture of the 1950s and 60s, and again they argue that a civic culture is one where the citizens are awake, they're not asleep. They don't just trust their politicians because they voted for them. They take a critical stand and they use informed judgments about how well they work. And we're going back to that idea, which of course is also rooted in liberalism, classical liberalism. And then lastly, in international relations, we can also think how far sceptical trust is there versus other types. And then lastly, the biggest question, what do we do? What is to be done? If we think that sceptical trust is important, you can try and improve the information environment, give people more insights, give people better knowledge about their government and about other agents, and you can try and therefore improve people's awareness of these sorts of issues. But of course, at a time when the media is also not being trusted, and where people are very much segmenting into their own media, so it's a much tighter bubble which they're looking at, it's very difficult to get the independent information and the other forms which they're going to need in order to understand whether to trust or not to trust. So all of these are issues which continue to be under debate, and we've got more details at the trustgov.net project, and you'd be very welcome to have a look at that and to participate and to give us thoughts about how far sceptical trust, rather than trust, is really the thing that we should be thinking through and the thing that we should be valuing, rather than an automatic assumption about how trust has gone down and how trust should be restored in society. Thank you all very much, and I very much welcome your support.